Imagine a winter so cold that the ocean freezes and the wind screams like a banshee. In the modern world, we survive this with central heating and fiberglass insulation. But 1,000 years ago, the Vikings survived it with nothing but wood, dirt, and genius. Their homes weren't just shelters, they were climatic machines, engineered with an intuitive grasp of physics that rivals modern sustainable design. The first secret lay in the shape, "We build boxes. Vikings built ships even on land." The Viking longhouse often featured curved, convex walls, a design known as the Trelleborg type. This wasn't for style, it was for aerodynamics. A flat wall meets the wind head-on, taking the full force of the gale and creating a high-pressure zone that sucks heat out of the building. A curved wall allows the wind to slip around the structure, reducing drag and structural stress. It's the same principle used in modern car design, applied to a house made of logs. But the shape was just the beginning. To keep the heat in, they turned the roof into a living organism. They didn't use tiles or slate, they used the earth itself. The Viking turf roof was a masterpiece of multi-layered engineering. It started with a layer of birch bark shingles, laid like fish scales to waterproof the timber. On top of that went sawed earth and grass roots laid grass side down to bond with the bark, and then another layer grass side up. This wasn't just a roof, it was a thermal battery. The earth on the roof provided immense thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night. It also grew. The root systems knit the roof together into a monolithic carpet that was windproof, waterproof, and soundproof. In the dead of winter, this roof did something even smarter. It held the snow. Instead of shedding snow like a modern peaked roof, the Viking roof was designed to keep a layer of it. Snow is mostly trapped air, making it an incredible insulator. The house literally wore a blanket of snow to stay warm. Inside this earthen bunker, the heating system was equally revolutionary. Forget the wall fireplace, that's a waste of heat. The Vikings used a langeld, a long fire. This was a trench of fire running down the center of the earthen floor. By placing the heat source in the middle of the room, they ensured that heat radiated evenly in all directions, creating a thermal core that no wall-mounted fireplace could match. But an open fire means smoke, and smoke kills. Or does it? The Vikings turned this deadly gas into an asset. Without chimneys, the smoke rose to the high, peaked ceiling, and stayed there. It formed a smoke blanket, a hot, dense layer of gas that trapped the rising heat and prevented it from escaping through the roof. The inhabitants lived in the clear air below, while the smoke above acted as a thermal lid. Living with a smoke blanket required precision engineering. The roof height and pitch had to be calculated perfectly so the smoke line hovered just above head height. If the roof was too low, you suffocated. If it was too high, you froze. To control this, they built Liori smoke vents in the roof that could be opened or closed with long poles. These valves allowed them to regulate the draft and the smoke level manually. A primitive but effective climate control system. The smoke did more than insulate, it preserved. The constant bath of creosote and soot hardened the roof timbers, making them rot-resistant and driving away insects. A Viking house didn't just shelter its owners, it pickled itself, ensuring it would stand for generations. But heat rises, and the floor is cold. To solve this, The Vikings didn't sleep on the ground. They built pillar-raised wooden platforms running along the walls. By elevating their living space just half a meter, they lifted themselves out of the cold draft, near the floor, and into the radiant warmth of the fire. The space underneath the platforms acted as storage and an insulating air gap. It was a house within a house, creating a cozy, elevated zone for sleeping and working. Privacy was sacrificed for warmth. These sleeping platforms often featured enclosed wooden box beds. When you climbed in and shut the doors, your body heat warmed the small space rapidly, creating a microclimate that stayed toasty all night. It was like sleeping in a wooden lung. But all this heat retention would be useless if the house was damp. Moisture is the thief of warmth. The Vikings knew that a wet house is a cold house. So they became masters of drainage. Before a single log was laid, they stripped the topsoil and filled the foundation pit with stones and gravel. This capillary break stopped ground moisture from wicking up into the floor. They dug deep ditches around the walls to divert meltwater. They essentially built their houses on dry islands of their own making. This obsession with dryness extended to the walls. In wooded areas, they used vertical logs, caulked with moss and resin-soaked wool. Moss is nature's expanding foam. When it gets damp, it swells, sealing the cracks even tighter. In treeless Iceland, they built walls of turf, 2 meters thick, massive earthen berms that were impervious to the wind and cold. Even light was sacrificed for heat. Viking houses had no large windows. Windows are thermal holes. Instead, they had tiny skylights covered in translucent animal gut or thin scraped skin. These let in a ghostly, diffuse light, but kept the wind out. In the winter darkness, the house became a cave of flickering firelight, a sensory deprivation tank that focused all attention on the warmth of the hearth. But a single house, no matter how well built, is an island. To survive the true Arctic fury, you need a fleet. Viking settlements were planned as defensive systems against the weather. They grouped houses together to create wind shadows. Barns and workshops were placed on the windward side to take the brunt of the storm, shielding the living quarters. They built fences and planted hedges, not just for property lines, but to control snowdrifts. A properly placed fence could force the snow to pile up against a wall, adding insulation, rather than blocking the door. The village was a single organism, huddled together for warmth. Socially, this architecture enforced survival. You couldn't be a hermit in the Viking Age. The warmth was communal. Families slept together, worked together, and huddled around the same fire. If your fire went out, your neighbors were your only lifeline. The physical structure of the village mirrored the social structure, tight-knit, interlocking, and mutually dependent. In the end, the Viking house was a triumph of observation. They watched how snow fell, how wind moved, and how smoke rose. They didn't try to conquer nature with brute force. They aikidoed it, using the snow for insulation and the wind for ventilation. They turned the hostility of the North into a tool for survival. So, the next time you turn up your thermostat, remember the Viking family sitting comfortably in their smoke-filled, turf-covered, ship-shaped home, listening to the blizzard rage outside, warm and alive in the middle of a frozen hell. Their architecture proves that you don't need high technology to live comfortably, you just need high intelligence. The principles they used: thermal mass, passive solar, aerodynamic design are the exact same principles modern eco-architects are rediscovering today. We are only just catching up to what the Vikings knew 1,000 years ago. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the engineering of the past, hit that subscribe button. What modern comfort would you miss the most in a Viking longhouse? Let us know in the comments. The walls of Viking houses were not just fences, but complex, multi-layered structures. In wooded areas, they built with vertically placed logs. The so-called post and beam construction, the logs were split in half and placed with the flat side facing inwards, tightly fitted together. Thick wood itself is excellent at retaining heat. The gaps between the logs were the main source of heat loss, so they were carefully caulked. Moss, wool, and hemp soaked in resin or tar were used. This sealant was hammered into the joints with great force, making the wall virtually monolithic. Moss was the ideal material. It did not rot, had antiseptic properties, and expanded when wet, closing the gaps even more tightly. The walls became impervious to wind. No house, no matter how warm, could withstand the Arctic winter alone. The Vikings understood the power of community and built their settlements as unified defense systems against the cold. A village or farmstead, tung, was planned so that the buildings protected each other. Farm buildings, warehouses, and workshops were located around the perimeter, creating a buffer zone for residential buildings. The wind first hit the uninhabited walls, losing its force. Fences and hedges acted as snow fences and windbreaks. They were placed so that snowdrifts did not block the entrances, but, on the contrary, provided additional insulation for the blank walls. Collective survival was the basis of the social structure. A lone individual was doomed to freeze.